Some people say sorry, even when the world has not accused them. In quiet rooms, in passing hallways, in conversations that needed no apology, the word escapes like a reflex, soft, automatic, almost invisible. It is not always about guilt. Sometimes it is about safety. It is the language of those who learned that peace came from shrinking, from smoothing the air, from being less loud, less demanding, less in the way. An apology becomes a key, one that once unlocked protection, belonging, or silence. And over time, the key is used so often that its purpose is forgotten. The door is no longer there, but the hand still reaches for it. The psychology of unnecessary apology is not weakness. It is memory. It is survival, frozen into habit. And within that simple word lies a whole invisible history. Chapter 1. Quiet recognition. There is a moment so small it almost escapes notice. A moment hidden inside an ordinary day. A conversation that ends, a message that is sent, a chair that scrapes slightly against the floor. And then the word appears. Sorry. It falls from the mouth with no deliberation, no pause. It arrives before thought, before intention, as if it has been living there longer than awareness itself. At first, it does not seem strange. Society praises politeness, softness, consideration. An unnecessary apology can even sound kind, thoughtful, refined. But when the days begin to play backward in the mind, a quiet pattern emerges. The word is not only spoken when harm has been done. It is spoken for breathing too loudly, for needing space, for existing. In that recognition, a subtle discomfort forms. Not dramatic, just a gentle disturbance beneath the surface. Why is there an apology when no wrong has occurred? Who is being protected by this word? Sometimes the apology is offered to invisible people, strangers, memories, shadows of authority that no longer stand in the room. It is given preemptively, as if danger might arrive through the smallest misunderstanding. As if existence itself might be an inconvenience that must be softened with softness. This is not about manners. It is about self-perception. About a quiet belief that one's presence must be justified, lightened, shrunk into something acceptable. The apology becomes a way of shrinking without realizing it. A way of saying, I will take up less space so you don't have to notice me too much. And yet, this recognition is not harsh. It is gentle, like hearing one's own heartbeat for the first time. Nothing needs to be judged. Nothing needs to be corrected. Only noticed. Because the first step toward change is not resistance. It is awareness. Chapter 2. Where it began long before the word sorry became a habit, it was a strategy. In many lives, the earliest lessons are not taught through language, but through atmosphere. The air itself teaches. The tone of a room, the volume of voices, the sudden silence after a question. A child does not need complex explanations to understand when something feels unsafe. The nervous system remembers first. The mind learns later. In some homes, love is conditional, wrapped in expectation. In others, emotions move like sudden storms, unpredictable, loud, and then strangely calm. There are rooms where a small mistake becomes a great offense. There are tables where disagreeing feels like betrayal. And so, the child watches carefully, listens, adjusts, learns the art of disappearing before trouble can appear. An apology becomes invisible armor, a small offering placed before imagined danger, a peace treaty signed in advance, again and again. Sometimes the apology is taught directly, say you're sorry. At other times, it is learned indirectly, through eye rolls, through sighs, through the emotional withdrawal that follows honesty. In both cases, the lesson is the same. Harmony is more important than truth. Silence is safer than expression. Agreeableness is survival. Over time, the child who once whispered apologies to keep the world calm grows into an adult who apologizes even for joy, even for questions, even for taking up simple space. The reason is no longer remembered. Only the reflex remains. The original environment may no longer exist. The authority figures may be gone. The threats may have evaporated into time. And yet, the body continues to act as if the past is still standing in the doorway, listening, judging. But it is important to understand, this habit did not form from weakness. It formed from intelligence of a different kind. A deep, instinctive intelligence that learned how to keep the heart safe in a world that once felt too loud, too sharp, too much. And in that understanding, compassion quietly begins to replace confusion. Chapter 3. The psyche's explanation. Small, repeated experiences shape the mind more deeply than dramatic moments ever could. The human brain is not designed only to think, it is designed to protect. It studies patterns, memorizes cause and effect, and stores invisible instructions on how to stay safe. When an apology once reduced tension. When a soft voice once prevented anger. When self-blame once preserved connection. The brain quietly recorded this. This works. Do it again. What follows is not conscious choice, but conditioning. A neural pathway carved by repetition. The body learns the rhythm of apology the same way it learns breathing. The moment discomfort rises, even slightly, the familiar response is triggered. A conditioned calming mechanism activated before awareness can intervene. Psychologically, this pattern is closely tied to what is known as the fawn response. Not fight, not flight, not freeze, but a fourth, less spoken form of survival, appeasing. The instinct to please in order to survive. To soften others so that the self may remain unharmed. Alongside this, a second pattern often develops, hyperresponsibility. The belief that one is somehow responsible for the emotional weather in every room. If someone feels uncomfortable, the mind searches inward for fault. If tension exists, it must have been caused. And if it was caused, then it must be repaired. Sorry becomes an attempt to rebalance the world. Yet, most of these internal systems formed long before logical understanding. They belong to the body, not the intellect, which is why simply knowing it is unnecessary does not immediately undo it. The reaction lives deeper, in the nervous system, where memory is felt, not remembered. The unnecessary apology is therefore not just a word. It is a small, trembling echo of past environments. A message sent from an older version of the self that once needed protection. And understanding this is not about labeling it wrong. It is about seeing it clearly. As a mechanism born from a deep, misplaced, but once necessary love for survival. Chapter 4. The inner resistance. There is a strange contradiction that lives beneath the automatic apology. On one side, a quiet knowing, nothing wrong has been done. On the other, an even quieter pull, apologize anyway. It is in that space that inner conflict begins. The mind recognizes the imbalance, the unnecessary self-blame, the shrinking, the softness offered where none was required. And yet, the body does not trust this recognition. The body remembers older rules, older dangers, older consequences for taking up too much space, speaking too freely, standing too firmly in one's own truth. So the person hesitates. A thought forms, don't say it this time. But the heart quickens, the chest tightens. There is a subtle fear of what might follow if the word is not spoken. Will the room grow colder? Will connection feel more fragile? Will silence be misunderstood as arrogance, neglect, rejection? And so, even in awareness, the apology slips out. Not because it is true, but because not saying it feels more dangerous than saying it. This is where shame often appears, not only for the imagined offense, but for the inability to stop apologizing. A quiet frustration begins to whisper, why can't this change? Why am I still like this? But this resistance is not weakness. It is a nervous system still trying to protect a version of the self that once needed protection more desperately than it does now. The inner child has not yet learned that the environment has changed, that the threat has passed, that existence is no longer something that must be softened to be tolerated. So the conflict continues, silently, between who the person was forced to become and who they are slowly remembering they are allowed to be. Chapter 5. The gentle realization. The shift does not arrive as a sudden awakening. There is no dramatic moment, no sharp turning point, only a soft, almost imperceptible change in the way the self is witnessed. It begins in silence, a pause before the word forms, a second longer than usual, a breath that lingers in the chest, and in that space between impulse and expression, something new appears. Not resistance, not correction, but curiosity. Why does this feel so urgent? Who am I protecting right now? What am I afraid will happen if I don't apologize? These questions do not demand answers. They simply exist, gently hovering in awareness. And for the first time, the apology is seen as something separate from identity. Not a truth, not a flaw, just a pattern, just an echo. There is a quiet grief in this recognition. Grief for the younger self who believed that shrinking was safety, that blame was belonging, that silence was survival. But there is also tenderness, a deep, unexpected compassion for the one who learned to disappear in order to remain loved. And slowly, another truth begins to form. Perhaps the world does not require constant apology. Perhaps presence is not an offense. Perhaps space does not need permission to be occupied. This realization is not loud. It does not try to fix or change. It simply allows the self to exist for a moment longer than usual without apology. And in that suspended moment, something sacred happens. The nervous system listens, learns, updates its memory just a little, and the old belief, I must be smaller to be safe, begins for the first time to loosen its grip, not through force, but through understanding. Chapter 6. Relearning personal space. There is an unfamiliar sensation that arises when apology begins to fade. It is not immediately comforting. It feels like stepping into a room with no furniture, wide, quiet, and strangely exposed. Without the habitual sorry to soften edges, to cushion presence, there is nothing left between the self and the world. Just space. At first, this space can feel dangerous. A subtle vulnerability hums beneath the skin. Words feel heavier. Movements feel more noticeable. The body is no longer hiding behind politeness. It is simply there. And yet, something else begins to happen in that openness. Breath deepens. Shoulders lower. The spine, long accustomed to shrinking, slowly remembers its natural alignment. There is an unspoken permission taking form, permission to take up air, time, silence, and sound. In the absence of apology, the self becomes more honest. Not louder, not harder, just clearer. A request no longer carries an apology before it. A boundary is no longer wrapped in shame. Silence is no longer an admission of fault, but a choice, a resting place. This is the relearning of personal territory, emotional, psychological, physical. An invisible boundary drawn not in defense, but in self-recognition. The understanding that presence does not intrude. It simply exists, the way a tree occupies soil, the way the moon occupies the sky. There is a tenderness in this process. Old instincts still appear, visiting from time to time. The impulse to apologize still rises in the chest. But now it is seen. Not obeyed. Not judged. Just noticed like a passing cloud. And in this noticing, the self grows quieter, stronger, more rooted in its own unspoken right to remain. Chapter 7. A poetic resolution. In the end, no grand declaration is needed. The world does not pause to acknowledge growth that happens in silence. There is no ceremony for the moment a person finally stops apologizing for their own existence. And yet, it is one of the most sacred shifts a human heart can make. The air feels different, not because it has changed, but because the one breathing it no longer believes it must be earned. Each step now meets the ground without hesitation. Each word, spoken or unsaid, carries its natural weight, no heavier, no lighter than it is meant to be. The echoes from the past have not vanished. They never truly will. But they have softened into something almost gentle, like a distant memory that no longer commands attention. The child who once apologized for safety is no longer alone. They are held, not by time, not by others, but by a present self that understands. There is a quiet dignity in this understanding. No one needs to be smaller for love to exist. No voice needs to disappear for peace to remain. No heart needs to fold itself in apology for simply being. And so the person stands, not louder, not prouder, but truer, existing without explanation, breathing without permission, living without apology. And in that stillness, the world finally meets them not as an intruder, not as a burden, not as an inconvenience, but as a presence that was always meant to be here.